So welcome to Discovering Creativity. This is an idea that was started by the Instituto San Miguelense, American Creativity Association, and why not Texas A&M Creativity, Texas A&M University, which is what I represent. And so we have with us Janice Francisco. Thank you so much. And I want to ask you a couple of questions to begin with about, because very likely your idea about creativity may have evolved over the years. So, well, how do you define creativity now?
I think that's a
What is
good,
most important for you? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's a really good assessment there. I have put a lot of thought into how I defined creativity many, many years ago. And my original thought was that creativity is an attitude that transcends paradigms and beliefs. It's a soul level yearning to fulfill a purpose, uniquely contribute, and leave a mark. And I think it is still somewhat that, but I'm going to say it's probably been, I don't know. It's hard to believe. It's probably 14 years since I graduated, maybe longer, from my master's program. And being out in the field using creativity as a major piece of the work that I do. And also going through just some personal evolution, right? We all change, we grow,
Yes.
Right? I think where I've landed is there's something different to creativity. To me, it links very much to our divine expression. It links very much to our uniqueness by way of what are we truly creating? Who are we being? How are we being? And what are we seeing in our lives? Because ultimately, whether it's through our thought process or meditation process, whatever we do, we are creating our reality. And so to me, it's a tremendously powerful tool that when we understand how we can harness it, we can truly make change in our lives and in the lives of others. So I don't know if that helps you with the definition, but I think it still is something very much at a soul level for me. It really is part of how we express ourselves as human beings. And we've really got to be able to connect to that, to have that soul level connection to the divine.
Yeah, it does help because I've seen over the last 70 or 60, 70 interviews, some people tend to become more academic when they give an explanation, and some people tend to become more personal in terms of how, when you talk about expression of your potential and making an impact, is a different type of dimension. So not many people use the word legacy, but for me, that's an interesting word to use, which is in terms of thinking about creativity. If you look into the future, so well, you are as creative as the legacy that you leave behind. But again, that's mine. So what do you think could be some of the obstacles facing companies when approaching creative thinking training or facilitation?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. I think there's an assumption in that companies are going looking for that.
Yes, that's a.
And I would really like to bust that assumption or that myth. So
yes.
I think we have to recognize that creativity is an end to a means, right? We need creative individuals thinking in ways beyond what we normally do in the environments that we live in. And I will say that there's been very few clients who have come to us specifically saying, I want creativity training.
Yes.
Really, they're typically describing a challenge they're having. So if they're an organization that's focused on being more innovative, sometimes they will, and sometimes they don't recognize that there is a creative aspect to seeing that business outcome. So I think the biggest, what are the main obstacles? I don't think they know they need it. And I think it's this big thing that isn't well understood. And when we really look at the essence of what creativity does, it allows us, creative thinking allows us to engage in creative problem solving to deal with the things that we need to resolve in our business to get to the places where we want to go. And so a lot of the work that I do is around team performance and how our team's getting to do the work that they need to do. And usually where people will come to me, it's from the standpoint of they recognize that the team has a mandate. They may be having some difficulty getting through it. The leaders want to make it easier for people to get through it. And one of the things I find they forget is the only reason we solve, or the only reason we form teams in businesses is to solve problems, to reach our goals. And so if you look at the fact that all work that you do is, it's this gap, right? The gap between where you are and where you want to be and the results that you want to see. If you're not seeing what you want to see, then you've got to be doing something different. And in order to do something different, you need to use your creativity. You can't do the same things you've always done. So I think the obstacles are they don't quite connect what it means. So they either don't understand it as an underlying requirement or necessity to get to the results that they want, or they are focused so much on innovation that they think that creativity becomes the silver bullet, this magic pill, or whatever, that if we just get people to be more creative, we're going to have all of these other better outcomes around innovation. And again, in my experience, that's not the case. People have to be able to connect that to a process, a problem-solving process, to a broader picture of the outcome that they want. So they need to, the obstacle is they don't understand that it is a means to an end. It's a very much a component of it. And the issue is people have not been trained how to be creative thinkers. We reward people in universities and colleges and in elementary school, we reward them for being critical thinkers. And we reward our leaders in business for getting results at whatever cost, in whatever means. We just want to see a result. And it doesn't matter if you get us a result and you have to go redo it because you didn't do the right thinking to make it happen in the way that was going to be more beneficial. The point is you got a result. So I think there's a little bit of a skew in some of that. And we as creativity practitioners need to recognize people aren't going to be looking for creativity. They're looking to solve a problem. And so, then do they want to buy creativity training? They really just want to solve the problem, right? So we have to help draw the connection for them as to we can help you solve your problem and get different results if your people are trained to think differently and can apply that skill set to help you there. So there's a long-winded answer, but I really get, I was very naive in my early days. I thought I could sell anybody creativity training, and no, I can't. I can help them solve problems in their businesses. And if solving a problem in their business involves me leading them through creative problem solving, or me helping to create greater awareness of what their options are so they can do that. And one of those options might be training for their people so that they can do this better over time. Then that's a possibility. But hanging up a shingle to say, hey, come and buy creativity training doesn't necessarily work. They're not looking for that in the higher scheme of things, at least up until now. So with AI coming and kind of this love-hate relationship with AI, or AI is here, maybe some of that will shift because a large benefit humans have is their creativity. So if we can learn how to use our creativity more, maybe we can weather this and work with this a bit better. So I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of my take on that. I don't think they really know they want it. That's not what they really
helps.
Want.
I found the same thing in Singapore. I went from Buffalo. I went so super excited about it, but I did not know that I was not connecting with what people were looking for. And this whole thing is that even thinking about outcomes, the process itself is a process where you enable people to solve their own problems. So it's not a consultancy. It's not someone expert that comes to tell you, okay, this is what I found out, and this is my suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
It's more so. Yeah, the big disconnect is that people don't think in terms of process; they think in terms of outcomes. So I just want, because they've always thought that way, so they will only buy the things they have been thinking forever.
Yeah.
If 100% of the people that go into business, they went through Buffalo, that thought about and learned and got a master's in creative thinking, then it's okay. Then they will buy that thing because they don't know what it is, but they don't think that way. So yeah, it's a huge disconnect, and it took me a lot of tears and frustration to find out.
Oh, you had to problem solve how to do your business, right?
And also, I mean, when you have your own business, it's so much you can do in the delivery and so much you can do in the marketing. And when you get burned out in the marketing, you don't have energy to do any type of training. So you have to have a positive attitude at all times about how to build something. And if you are able to build that, then that's great. But it depends on the culture and on the messaging and so many other things. So I find that some people have very good connections and they have selling points. Who you know is as important as what you know.
Mm-hmm.
Who you know. So, and I found people that were very good they were experts in advertising, 10 years or 15 years in advertising, and they went into creativity. So they sold creativity to advertising companies because they were experts in that. And they had the connections.
Right.
So that was the whole thing. So I was going to ask you about, can you tell me about one or two of your highlights of your stories about how you went into a company and delivered service that, you over-delivered. In other words, they were very impressed and very happy with your work.
That happens a lot.
That's good.
I'm just trying to relay a couple of stories, maybe something that's a little more recent. So, I'm going to take a research and development lab that was struggling, a global research and development lab that was struggling in achieving what the CEO wanted to have by way of breakthrough innovation. And their first thought was, we need to tidy up on our creativity skills and bring more discipline into our research people around creativity so we can drive breakthrough innovation. And I literally said to the client, sure, I can help you deliver a one-day creative training or, a few hours of creative training, but that's not going to do anything to solve your problem. And I would feel badly about taking your money. And they kind of went, okay, tell us more. And we went through, what it takes to shift something like that, and how you get an entire research lab that's doing, this is probably up there by way of the global companies. And what the issue was that people were being asked to lead innovation without understanding the entire scope of what it was. And in order to enable innovation, they were looking at only one aspect, and that was, we need people to be creative. And if we give people time to be creative, in the good old world of, let's just give them X% of their time or, effort to dedicate to creative pursuits, and let's see what comes out at the end by way of innovation. Well, that never goes anywhere. And so we had a pretty frank conversation, and I said, fine, if that's really what you want to do, I can do that. But I need you to understand it's not going to do any good for you. But if that's how you want to spend your money, so be it. I'll give you something really good for the few hours you want me to come in, but don't look to me for thinking that that's going to solve your problem. So the general manager and the innovation manager sat down with me and basically said, okay, what are we not doing? And I said, well, let's do some diagnosis here and figure out. And so we applied a creative problem-solving model to go in and work with them to, where the agreement was, let's look at what's really happening here. Do you have the right conditions in place to be driving breakthrough innovation? And, do you have the right support at a global level from your CEO, right? And so we did an analysis. There was a series of things. I'll cut to the chase, but what we found was there was no process. There was a lack of understanding. There was no definition for what breakthrough innovation was. So the CEO was telling them how he was unhappy, but he couldn't tell them what they could do to do better. And yet they were supposed to figure out how to do better. And then they had implemented a program 5 years ago, giving people the ability to do creativity time with the intention of creating innovation, but it wasn't managed by the managers. It wasn't targeted. It just wasn't going to ever achieve what they wanted to achieve. So they were asking people to do things, expecting a result without giving them any guidance around it. So, and then we did some pretty heavy duty diagnostics. I have a diagnostic tool where we could benchmark where they were in their innovation maturity. And we then had valid information from which they can work. So that client then turned around and said, oh, clearly what we need is some support for our leaders first, and then we can look at what we do with our people. And I basically said, right, if you don't lead it, they can't do it. So let's start with you and let's start to delve into what do you need to do to feel resourceful to be leading this outcome? And then what do we then need to do by setting expectations with the staff so that they can do it? So, so that's been kind of cool. We do a thing with clients where we ask them to give us feedback on, what it was like to work with us, what was the turning point? Why did they think we were the right person to work with? And, one of the reasons was I basically said to them, I don't think what you're asking me to do is going to help you. And then the other aspect was, you helped me understand what I didn't know, but you made me feel good about learning about what I did need to do. So there was aspects to that. So that's kind of one scenario. And now that's turned into a multi-year client. We did our first engagement with them, ended earlier this year. And we've now signed a 2-year agreement to continue to work with the leadership team and help them build their leadership capacity, as well as build the organizational capacity for innovation and bring in some of those processes. So that's the first one. And that's all because I said, no, I'm sorry, a creativity workshop isn't going to help you. The second one was a really interesting situation where the client called us in for a creative problem solving session around how they could roll out a cultural change in a highly unionized just a plant environment. And what happened in the process of the investigation the client was doing was they discovered that what they thought was an engineering, machinery, and throughput issue turned out to be a human factors issue. And so they ran some experiments to see what they could do internally. And they found that by getting the supervisors and directors in these plants to actually take a little bit of effort to be kind, to hold doors open, to connect with human beings, just magically, the throughput and the equipment issues resolved themselves. And so they were at the end of this looking at, so how do we roll this out to get plants and managers and supervisors, directors to understand that, and if they want to fix these problems around, the throughput, that the leaders have to get, better and nicer and whatever. And it really came down to, seriously, it was a kindness factor. And people were showing up on their shifts all the time. And people were actually showing up on the night shift where people would, that would have the most absenteeism. We're just writing about it in a blog this month, actually. But what was really interesting was when they kind of realized that it wasn't that, rather than engaging us to help them figure out, how do we get people to do the right things by way of hitting this button and that button on the line. It really shifted into a cultural thing where it became, how are humans treating humans, and what do we need to do to make it more pleasant for people to show up to work and feel like they're contributing and that they're being heard and that they can actually solve the problems that they're observing on the line, right? If we listen to them and we communicate to them and we show up present and mindful and, all of those crazy, weird things that, make engineers run screaming from the room, right? It's like, what do we do with that? Well, we just approach it in the same way, right? You figure out what are the pieces, what are the steps, what's the scaffolding you have to build to help people build that up, and how do you get people just treating each other nicely? So, that's a training process too, which required a lot of creativity, to come to that, and a lot of creative problem solving to have those ahas and to recognize that what they uncovered, they thought that the process they had to figure out what was going on in the plants was now not worthwhile, because instead of fixing equipment and building a business case to buy new equipment, they were having to come with a recommendation on how to change the culture on the plant floor. And I just looked at them and I said, no, what you've done is you have found the absolute perfect process for helping people become aware of their impact on other human beings by searching and being open and taking feedback. I said, you modeled exactly what you want the leaders to do by doing it. You showed the plant workers that they were valued by giving them the opportunity to speak. And now you know what you need to do in every one of your plants. They had 10 more plants to go and do this. I said, you've got the model. We're just going to go back and do the exact same thing. But coming out of that, we're going to give the leaders, a little bit more support by way of the skills and how to do that, rather than leaving them to kind of do it all on their own. And so it was just a big, it's one of those, you start down a path and you think you know the answer. So you do your best to figure out what is this, right? You go fishing and you find out you catch a totally different species than you thought you would. And then you realize that it's way more valuable than what you were looking for in the first place. So then you've got to figure out how to turn that around and do something with it. And, doesn't it all come down to how are we relating to each other as human beings in the work that we do? There's a person operating that machine, right? There's a person walking through that door. So let's connect with the people and we'll get better results in the work that we're doing, even if it's very mechanistic in the process. So that was a fun one.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you bring that up, because not many people have talked about this. And everybody talks about team building, but you don't know how to build a team unless you have some sort of guidelines and behavioral things that can help people connect with each other, listen to each other, give feedback to each other, respect authority, understand authority, give feedback to authority, and see how they can influence each other and people in a positive way, so that they become co-creators and validated and respected for what they give. And I think that creative problem solving, to a certain extent, does that, or at least can be used as a tool to help people move in that direction. I think that's what you were talking about. And very rarely I find people that have used this in maybe to the extent that you have.
I use it quite extensively. It is at the core of all the work that we do. Even when we go in to do a custom instructional design work, we're applying creative problem solving to figure out, how do we do that? Because, let's face it, not everybody has an unlimited budget. Very few people do. Usually there's more people to train than they have budget for. And if they're looking for customized training, it's usually related to a very specific business outcome. And so we are not experts in anybody's business, but we are experts in asking questions and instructional design. And, we will use creative problem solving as a means to figure out what is the most effective and efficient way to deliver the outcome that the client is wanting. And ultimately, if you're training, you need to see a shift in behavior, and you need to equip people with the tools and the skills to be able to make that shift in behavior. Because in that process, we're going to be asking them to be very uncomfortable. And so we've got to be able to help them make that shift and learn how to do something new in that process of unlearning what they were doing or becoming more aware of why something that they weren't aware of is important. You know, we've got to really, you talked earlier before we started about creating bridges, right? We've got to create those bridges between the awareness they have and the way that we want them to be afterwards, and help them feel resourceful through that process. So, you know, we can't do that. I don't want to do that for 3 days if we can do it in 2 hours, right? But I also don't want to do it in a way that we leave people feeling like it's not complete and they're left out on a raft on the sea trying to figure out how to bail out the water, right? We've got to be dealing with all of those aspects too for them, so that the connections as they start to apply it day to day are easier for them to make, right? You've got to leave them the room to learn and grow, be a little uncomfortable, but help them over that part so that they can feel they own it, and they feel really proud of their achievements in that process.
Yeah. Okay. So I just have one more question.
Okay.
When I was looking at the list, I was not very happy. So I thought I better come up with something a little bit different. And is this whole thing about? It seems to me that the work you've been doing has had an amazing impact on what I call the emotional and the social development of people towards a more creative behavior. Emotional and social. And so that few aspects, not to talk about every single one, but 3 of them that came to my mind. One of them is trust. The other one would be risk-taking. The third one would be openness to new ideas. So what are some of the ways that you have helped people to trust each other, to maybe be able to take greater risks, or maybe to say, okay, I'm going to consider this. I'm going to talk about the good aspects of this idea, or to be more open to new ideas.
I wish I could give you a simple, straight answer. Let me give you some background. I think you hit the nail on the head. We, as human beings, occupy a physical, a logical, an emotional, and a spiritual space, right? We have mental bodies, we have logical bodies, we have emotional bodies. And I think one of the things that people don't understand about creative process, or that they overlook about creative process, is that it is a highly emotional and intuitive process. And in the work that, you know, the great researchers who created creative problem solving and all did, they did a fantastic job of creating the circumstances by which we could make the process of being creative repeatable, right? We know that if we do this, we can then go here, and depending on what the result is, we make a decision on what is the next step, right? There's a mechanism we can move through with confidence that if we want a creative result, there's certain kinds of thinking and things we can do. But in that process, we lost some of the aspect of the intuitive and emotional nature of creativity. I can't go teach people to be intuitive. But when I'm teaching them and I'm setting the conditions in an organization to help them understand the nature of the change that they are working through, I can ask them to do belly checks. I can ask them to think about what's truly in their heart. And I can caution them that the change and the learning that they're about to undergo is going to be highly emotional. And that if it isn't, they're not paying attention. They're not doing the work that they're supposed to do. Because if we're moving from here to here and we're trying to create a change, or we're trying to learn, we're trying to change our skills as human beings, it will be emotional, it will be uncomfortable. And most people don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the emotional intelligence because we are not cultured this way, right? We don't understand that thing that I'm feeling. We don't know what it is. We just get frustrated and we walk away from it. And because I've had to learn how to do that myself, I can bring that into the work that I do. And I can go, when we go through this, it might feel uncomfortable and it might feel this way. And you might have feelings that you don't understand what they are. And you may feel that you're spinning and not getting anywhere. And the first thing you need to do is you need to trust me and trust this process. And if you're having problems trusting me and trusting this process, I need you to speak up about it, because we're going to work through this together. So there's a whole aspect of when you're guiding people through this, you've got to establish that trust and work to build that rapport, so that as they move through the emotion, the emotional roller coaster of doing this work, it's not easy work to make change in an organization. It's not easy work to learn a new skill. They can feel comfortable about saying, I'm uncomfortable. They understand that that's normal and it's part of the process. And I think we don't tell people that, and we do them a big disservice. And I think we can forget that. We don't want to disable them. We don't want to plant, it's going to be awful. We don't want to set that up either. But we do have to be realistic about, this is not a logical process. Yep, there's logical steps we're going to go through. But the entire shift in awareness happens at the intuitive and the emotional level. And if you aren't able to connect to that, you don't get as good a result. So you have a great question. I don't know how I can answer it. I think I do it by understanding there is going to be a process they're going to go through. And it's not just creative problem solving. They're going to have to bump up against themselves. They're going to have to bump up against how they work. They're going to have to bump up against their teammates. They're going to have to bump up about that other group across the hall that's pissing them off. Like, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's going to happen in order to create that change. And if we can harness that and get people to understand that that's just part of the process and to stick with it and give them permission to step away, right? To give them that permission to take the breather, to understand that we can only go as fast as we can all process it, sort it out, be okay with it, that sort of thing. Then we start to build that. So maybe the way I do that is I do my best to model it, because I've had to live it. I've had to live it so many times, and I'm not saying I get it right all the time, because there's days I go, man, did I just mess up? But I at least have the ability to have those metacognitive skills to step back and, think about my thinking, right? Okay, what did I just do here? What just happened here? How am I feeling about it? What the hell does that mean going forward, right? It's that whole mindfulness skill that doesn't necessarily, mindfulness can be love-hate, right? Some people get it, other people don't. Other people can really embrace it. Other people think it's this woo-woo thing, but it's like, man, if I can't go through something on a day-to-day basis and step back and go, how am I feeling about that? What just happened? Was my thinking right? Could I have done that better? If we don't learn how to look inside, we can't do something really effective outside, because we're either our biggest help or our biggest hindrance, right? It's what's going on inside of us. It's what's going on in our heart. It's what's going on in our mind. If we cannot connect to that, we cannot effectively work outside in this external world. And so I am hypersensitive to that, and really attempt to model that to people, and bring that as a normalization of the playing field, so that when they dive in, they understand that we're really doing our best to create that psychological safety in a container that allows them to keep moving through something despite what the feedback is. Even if it looks like it's not successful, it's really successful. if you're able to do that mindfulness piece and look at, so what happened here? What did I learn? What do I do next? And that's the cool thing about creative problem solving. It gives you the container to do that if you're willing to use those other affective skills and bring in those emotional skills into that process. It's not logical. It's so not just logical. There's so much more of it that's an emotional piece that when we can hook that both up, we've got a stronger human being able to make the connections to the other human beings that they have to do that collaborative work with to get something done. So,
yeah, well, the whole thing about innovation, you think about prototyping and things that do not work, and I wanted to do this, it didn't happen. And you continue to try things because you believe in what you're doing, and eventually you get your breakthrough. And you think, well, I tried 20 times, it didn't work, but this time it worked. And you can build something on that. And if you had given up, nothing would have happened. So this whole thing is perseverance, grit, and resilience. Those are also they're part and parcel of the creative process at a deeper level. And then that goes with that mindfulness of learning why the intention, why we do something, and the outcome. What did we get out of it?
Yeah.
And how can we learn from it?
Yeah.
So emotionally, the whole thing is supercharged, because depending on what image you have of yourself, you can build a strong character through these circumstances, or a lot of people, they just find, oh, I don't think I'm good at this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's so interesting.
It reminds me of a group of auditors we used. You'd asked earlier about risk taking, and we had very successfully trained a group of auditors in an organization that were to go out and use creative problem solving and innovate how they were doing risk assessments and applying the risk model in the business. And we need to, make it easier for people to take risks. And we need to start with the auditors. It was all a great theory. And they did a fantastic job of learning how to apply the process, but they automatically sourced out anything from the list that took them into doing something different. So they could do a great job of generating novel ideas, but they did a wonderful job of making sure they never made it past the idea list. And so we had to go back. We were called back in. We were doing some follow-ups with the client. It's usually a multi-month thing. And the client says, we're observing some very bizarre behavior. So imagine a chief auditor going, I think we need to make my people fail. It's like, tell me about that. Because as a learning person, right? You don't want to, psychological safety and learning is really important. So I'm sorry, I might not want to hang your people out to dry. So tell me about that. And what we landed on was we realized that we needed to shift their perception of what risk was.
Yes.
Because they were coming at risk from an old model. And we were asking them to use a new model. So we had to help them make a mindset shift. But we couldn't tell them what to start thinking about risk. We had to give them an experience around it. So we designed something that basically got them to explore their thoughts about risk and where they were willing to take risks and where they weren't willing to take risks, and what made them decide to take a risk versus not take a risk. And it uncovered some really interesting insights, and then it made them realize that they were colluding on not taking risks because they hadn't really thought about there really wasn't any risk here.
Yeah. So you were exploring the concept.
Perception. So we had to, but you just can't tell people to do that. We have to shift awareness. We have to experience it. We've got to ask the questions. We've got to sit with it. We've got to do things with that. But it was really quite intriguing afterwards. And then we had to look at failure, right? If they took the risk, well, what were they afraid of? And what was the fear? And well, what would be the repercussions? And, how are you supported? What's going on in the organization? And so there was a lot of hallucinations about what could happen to them that weren't true. And so we had to totally unpack that, because often, we misperceive the risks. And, we, as human beings, we can misjudge things, right? Sometimes we do it on the side to our benefit, and sometimes we do it on the side to not our benefit. But you've got to really unpack that and have that awareness and mindfulness to kind of dive into that a little bit. So we get to do some pretty interesting things.
Yeah, I'm sure. I can see how you would be facilitating that conversation and helping them to become aware and also explore the constructs, and then maybe give them a bit more of time, give some time for them to accept a new reality as well, and then come up with some questions and some insights that they themselves would say, well, this is such an eye-opener that I did not know that I was thinking that way, and I was conditioned to behave this way, and now to the extent they feel a bit of freedom to think differently and to do different things. So interesting. Yeah. So with the reason I'm saying that because I studied cognitive fixation, and one of the areas was with auditors.
Oh,
that senior auditors, senior auditors found it more difficult to change the way they were doing things, and the beginners would make it was easier to learn new ways of doing things, because they had already that some sort of ingrained, come so used to certain ways of working. The expertise, they were expert at certain things, and they don't know that maybe those things, it was very difficult to change the way they were thinking about those things because of the many assumptions they were making.
Yeah, no, it's funny, right? We just, we all have things like that in our lives where we need to dig in and understand, why do we think that? And and when we can tease that out and give ourselves a few more choices, we can behave differently.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to stop here because I think